what's up, guys? It's Julia.
Hey, it's Andrea.
And it's Sabie. Welcome to another episode of It's Lit. For today, we are going to delve deeper into a text written by Michelle Tan, Belonging to My Body. In hindsight, the title seems as if it talks about ghosts, paranormal activities, or possession. But after reading this 11-page story, it has nothing to do with ghosts at all. The story conveys a message that is significant to us Filipinos since we are tightly connected to our own families. The story begins with a description of the main character, Michelle. As a Chinese, she did not have the typical features. In her own words, she wished that she was born a boy. It was because of the constant nagging and attention that her family gave to how she looked. Just like when once her distant aunt sighed in a tone meant to be reassuring. Well, that's alright. There's always whitening product. She liked to call this quote unquote the game. And it was played by the cousins in the family. The aunts and the uncles were spectators. Because of the game, she never found herself beautiful. She actually found it difficult to accept compliments as it is because she grew up with a family full of teasing, jokes, and banter. It was only until a certain point in her life that she found herself beautiful, and not even for the reason that she is beautiful. As she grew older, she thought that the game finally ended because the bickering about her appearance stopped. Then again, it never really ended. The story takes place in the Philippines and within a Filipino-Chinese family, which we can infer from where Michelle's cousin generally refers to her as Achi, a Chinese word that translates to ate in our context. We can also say that it is set in the Philippines because of their value for gatherings and traditions like Christmas and New Year. And they traveled to Cebu too. Oh, how I miss that city. Fun fact, guys. Growing up, my family and I would go to Cebu to celebrate the Sinulig Festival. It's such a surreal experience every time we'd visit the Basilica del Santo Niño, and at the same time, we get to relax at Shangri-La Mactan.
Thank you, Julia, for that as well as your wonderful insights about Cebu. We'll definitely be paying a visit once this pandemic's over. Let us now move on to the notable characters in the story. Of course, what would the story be without the aunts and uncles of Michelle? Well, they are not far from what we can coin as conservative and traditional, considering their Chinese descent. They were very judgmental too, especially with how Michelle looked. In the text, Aunt Helen asked in amusement if she was her mother's daughter and muttered, "There is always whitening." Aunt Helen did not like how she was not the typical petite and white lady she should be. But what about the parents of Michelle? At the start, it was mentioned that Michelle saw her mom as her only ally. She would defend her when her father would tease her. However, what's interesting is that when it comes to Michelle being teased and targeted during their reunions or gatherings, she would stay silent. Her father would add fuel to the fire during the game. He would join in and would repeat jokes when they were going home, further adding salt to her wounds. And now, most importantly, Michelle. Because of the game and the people around her, it was evident that she was filled with insecurities and doubts, usually because of her physical appearance. She was conscious of her darker skin tone, well, at least according to the standards of her family, and even her weight. There was one incident in the text that showed another interesting development of her character. This was when they were waiting in line at a buffet. Her younger cousin asked her for tips on how to get slimmer. Due to Michelle being groomed or trained by the game, she instinctively looked at her cousin closely and searched for flaws that she could give a remark on. But unlike what she was used to seeing in the game, she just chose to keep her mouth shut and stopped her judgment. This was a form of rebellion against what she was conditioned to do. Another interesting development happened when she got older and lost some weight. She started getting praised by her family or relatives, and they praised their focus on her cousins. Because of her experiences, she was not accustomed to words of encouragement, enough that she would doubt whether people were mocking her when they gave her compliments or not. She had a hard time accepting compliments. She did not even think she deserved them. In the end, she managed to feel comfortable in her own skin. She could finally ignore the pointed remarks of others and joke around. She learned not to take the game too hard because she gained confidence in herself, and she finally felt like she belonged in her own body.
I think that it is equally important we discuss a few themes that you were able to note in this essay. One theme that I find intriguing would be about standards. Typically, standards are set in institutions like schools, companies, government, etc. But Belong to My Body was able to portray that standards are present even within families. Michelle was expected to be petite in size, fair in complexion, skinny in body structure, all of which she was the opposite of. And because of the constant attention that was given to it by her family, she found it difficult to value herself. She didn't see herself as beautiful. She always looked down at herself in that way because of how she was groomed within her family. Michelle liked to call this the game, which she had no choice but to participate in because this was her family after all. She thought that the game would stop once she reached college because she finally lost weight. Her uncle notices her complexion again and claims that she shouldn't be standing next to Stephanie, her cousin, because it made her look darker. She learned to live with it though, realizing that at the end, I quote, she says, maybe it isn't so hard after all. Now, relating this to the greater scheme of things, standards become something that we learn to live with and tolerate once we are succumbed to what is lacking in us, especially if these standards are set by people who are close to us, like Michelle to her family.
Lastly, another theme that can be seen in the text is that humans react differently when exposed to stress or conflict. We tend to use defense mechanisms to cope. One defense mechanism that is evident in the story is scapegoating. And according to our research, in psychodynamic terms, scapegoating constitutes a group defensive manifestation, a shared fantasy or act designed to deal with unacceptable emotions such as hostility, sexuality, and guilt. The mechanisms for transfer of those emotions have been denoted as various kinds of displacement or projection. Scapegoating can also ensue as a means of dealing with a group's anger engendered by injured self esteem and narcissism. During reunions or gatherings, Michelle's relatives would participate in a game of thinly disguised insults and criticism. In order to take the group's attention off of their flaws and injured egos, they would transfer the hurt to someone else by launching their own sets of insults or comments. This can also be seen as a form of revenge, a way to relieve themselves at the expense of others. Michelle is guilty of using multiple defense mechanisms such as denial and intellectualization. Michelle could not let herself accept the compliments that she received from her friends and family. She did not think that she deserved them after all years of enduring the hurtful comments of her family. Michelle used the intellectualization defense mechanism by emotionally detaching herself from the situation by seeing it as a game. She started strategizing and looking at these interactions as if they were battles to be won. Intellectualization, according to our research, is defined as using excessive and abstract ideation to avoid difficult feelings.
Now, connecting two of the themes that we were able to derive from the text, we can pattern it closely to Philip Lopate's approach. Philip Lopate is an American essayist who describes such texts as something that is personal. He says, I remember in our 21st century literature discussion, he says that the hallmark of the personal essay is its intimacy. In other words, the essence of a CNF piece is the writer's personal touch to it. How intimate or how close he is to that experience, how much it means to him, the experience used in the essay. Now, belonging to my body primarily revolves around family, and every family has its distinctness. The difference in each family reflects various personal experiences, much like Michelle to her own family. Now, growing up in a Chinese Filipino family, her experience is a lot different compared to mine. Compared to the psychological aspect of the theme, psychology tackles the self, own thoughts, own feelings, making the text more personal in that sense. So that covers why Lopate's approach is suitable for that theme. But I want us to focus more on the first theme. Let's take that into consideration. It was mentioned that even in families, there are certain standards that are expected. Well, I am expected to perform good in school, be respectful to my peers. That is the standard of being part of the Aquino family. However, Michelle had to meet the standards that focused more on, well, how she looked like. She says, in the eyes of my Chinese family, proper girls came in small, pale, petite packages, like my eldest cousin Irene, whom I envied until college. Having been too dark and plump for their standards, rather, I became an easy target for my uncle's shaming jokes and my aunt's pointed suggestions, mostly given to fill the awkward silences during family gatherings. You see, not every family gives this much regard to appearance, but to Michelle's family, it is that significant to be petite and to have a light complexion. This is why the essay is so personal. This is why it's intimate to the writer, because it's Michelle's essay. It's not mine, it's not yours, it's simply her essay. And because of her experience with her family, that personal experience, it started to affect how she grew up, how she looked at herself, how she carried herself. And it was not quite a good impression. Essays like this, personal in nature, are able to extract values that are not likely, values and lessons that we cannot learn from books. Alright, now coming to the almost end of this podcast, I want to discuss something that makes a personal essay different. More than the approach of Philip Lopate, we have the narrative structure. A narrative structure has the tendency to affect a character in the essay, perhaps a setting, and even the plot. Belonging to My Body falls under the narrative structure we call coming full circle. Michelle begins by introducing who she is and what she looked like. At the beginning, she said, I wish I were born a boy, also exposing her family and how they treated her with the game. It was a reflection of how she would eventually see herself. She described the game as difficult to play, especially with her appearance. She never really met the expectations of the spectators of the game. I mean, her aunts and uncles. Tilliard mentions that the coming full circle narrative structure is when the essay circles back to how it began. In the latter part of the essay, Michelle brings up once again the game, but this time her participating in it as a grown up. The narrative structure impacts the character's development. Instead of thinking deeply about her uncle's shameful and snarky remark, she instead laughs, sips her red wine as the fireworks start to fly above her head on New Year's. Now, more than going back to how it started, Dilliard also claims that conclusions of essays that follow the coming full circle structure have, I quote, endings suggesting the presence of a future. Very intriguing to me, because essays usually end at just that. Period. There's nothing more. This is the ending. Deal with what you got. But this reminds me of Michelle's ending sentence, her closing sentence. My smile lingers a little longer than usual, and I think this isn't so hard after all. This makes the readers feel hopeful. Hopeful that maybe Michelle has learned to love herself, that maybe her family has changed, maybe she was able to tolerate her family. Much like a cliffhanger in the Netflix shows that we watch. Sometimes it can also depict a message that maybe Michelle eventually saw herself as beautiful, not because other people saw her the way her family didn't, but because she is beautiful, having no more reason to it. That, Sabby, is a very good insight. Now, I think we can all agree that one underlying lesson the author tries to teach us is that in life, it is very important to surround yourself with good people. People who love you and you trust at the same time. These type of people will simply make you feel more like you and good about yourself. Much like when Michelle began second year college. She started to feel more comfortable about herself in her sophomore year because she found friends she trusted. They affirmed her, and because of this, she learned to humbly accept compliments and began to look things from a different viewpoint in life. Moreover, she was more secure in seeing herself as truly beautiful. In relation to what Sabby said about Michelle actually learning how to accept the so called game, I think what was embedded in me at the last part of the text and changed my outlook was that our families may be the masters of jokes, teasing, and banter, yet the reality is that probably this is just their way of showing you that they love and care. These instances or moments in life often make them close to you, which is the reason why they do this. Different families have different kinds of expressing their love. And even in our own families, it has actually become part of our culture that this is the manner by which they express their love.
That's right.
Definitely.
Belonging to My Body by Michelle Tan was such a wonderful text. I know we were able to pick up a lot of new insights and definitely learned a lot.
That's right. That's it for today, guys. Once again, it's Julia.
It's Andrea.
And it's Sabie. And this is your favorite 21st century literature podcast. It's lit. See you guys in the next episode. Goodbye.